Coming up, a Sad Styles production.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mikey Aaronworth, signing on to the sign-off, a Frameworth podcast once again, and this time I know it's a little bit different than we normally do it. Usually there's a little bit of an introduction, which is just me, but what I'm starting to realize is I don't think I'm important enough to warrant doing the introduction on my own, especially when it's just the two of you, two of us, you and myself talking. Here, obviously, the you that I'm speaking to, if you're not watching on YouTube, is Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth. We are sitting down once again for more of an intimate look into the world of sports marketing, as it takes from our perspective. It's just you and me shooting the shit about some stories behind the scenes. I know you're filled to the brim with them, so you're always begging me to get on with just you and me. We have some guests on, like, no, you're just knocking on my door every day, calling me. I have to change my number. We had Brad Jansen on, who obviously can talk up a storm, as he should do when he's on a podcast, because he's great at that. And I feel like you and I don't get as much of an opportunity to speak it, but these are fun ones. And
most of the stories involve somebody else, and I'd rather get their perspective as well as mine. So
as well as yours, yeah. Well, it must have been tough for you if you haven't heard back, or the listener, if you haven't heard the podcast with Brad Jansen. It was a follow up to the episode, which was one of our most well received episodes, which outlines the time that you, and you're gonna get tired of me saying this because I think I've introduced like 6 episodes by saying this, but the time that you lost Rick Nash's game used jerseys, but it was from the perspective of the athlete represented at the time, Brad Jansen. You did a really good job of sitting there and taking it on the chin,
shutting up,
because I know that you and him can get into it a little bit more in a fun way. But I was happy to be able to hear his perspective about it. You know what's funny, actually, going back and thinking about the original Rick Nash episode. Multiple people reached out to me and said that their favorite part of that episode was the story of you putting deodorant in your hair at the golf tournament. That's a little teaser. If you hadn't heard it yet, go back and listen to the Rick Nash episode. There's a ton of jokes in there and a lot of inside jokes that we'll be speaking about moving forward. But moving forward into this episode, what we wanted to take some time to do is talk about another element of the world of sports memorabilia and sports marketing, to show you that it's not only about the signatures and autographs and framed photos and framed pucks. Part of what Frameworth has done, and we touched on this a little bit in the NFTs episode, is found ways to enhance our memorabilia or find new realms of marketing that give fans and owners and corporations alike an opportunity to experience the sport that they love, or the form of entertainment that they love in other ways. And one of the things that we touched on in that episode was the books that we had done, whether it was for Live Nation or for the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Toronto Raptors, coming into a book that you published with Eddie Shack, co-written by Ken Reed. And I'd love to spend some time talking about the publishing side of things, because that's an element of sports marketing that I feel is almost completely looked over. You know,
I think if you're getting into any business, you keep an open mind as to, and you have to have confidence in yourself that whatever you're going to dream up is possible. Right. So, we started a picture frame business that turned into a memorabilia business that turned into an autograph business that, and it just kept evolving.
And to add on to that, again, if you haven't heard some of the earlier episodes that kind of go over how Frameworth came to be what it is, when you say it started off as a picture framing business, that was not including photos of sports players or signed memorabilia. No. That was a whole trajectory that we were on that had nothing to do with sports. So if you're curious about how that was set up, again, there's a lot of episodes. You got some homework at the end of this one to go back and listen to some of the earlier episodes.
Well, so basically, it started as a picture frame business, and we touched on this one of the earlier episodes. But our biggest account when I started this small little company was the record industry, and we touched on that. And so our roots were really, as far as memorabilia is concerned, was more music than sports.
Right.
And we did that gold records and we still do. We started with my dad's company, and that was...
Why don't you explain what you mean by the gold record?
Well, the gold records were what you see in the background of any celebrity musician's home.
Yep.
It's a gold record that was given to them as commemorating a certain amount of sales.
Right. Gold or platinum,
Right.
depending on.
Right.
And so anytime you look, I mean, anytime you watch a music documentary, these are
That's
on
wall decor.
everyone's walls. And what a lot of people might not realize is if there's a Canadian band there somewhere, chances are the photo on their wall, the frame on their wall is something that we did.
Well, not just Canadians. Whenever a band came to Toronto, the music company up here that was hosting them for a concert or for an appearance would want to give them their awards.
Right.
And so if you see an award in the back, in fact, we supply a lot of the background for movie sets, et
That's
cetera,
fair.
et cetera. We
Not
get
just for
calls.
music either.
Right, for
There
sports.
was, what was the movie? I think it was like, I totally forgot about this. There was like a Hallmark movie or something
Yep.
that they needed someone's room to be filled with hockey memorabilia. And you were thinking, you're like, okay, I mean, we can give you a Gretzky jersey, whatever, because, everyone's going to want that. Or I can stitch up a jersey with my own last name on the back of it.
No. That's not quite how it went.
Is it not?
No. What happened was they wanted background memorabilia and they wanted jerseys and whatever we had in the showroom. And then I said, well, I gave them a list of things. And then I got a call back from the woman a little while later saying, are you licensed to do this? And I said, well, they're all licensed product. No, are you licensed to supply background stuff for movie sets, et cetera? I said, I have no idea what that's about. And she said, well, our legal team said we better not do that because we may end up having to pay royalties for stuff in the background of a movie.
So that's a very good point because this should shed some light on how complicated the licensing side of things can be. And that's to say that we live in that world and you've worked in it for 30 plus years. And yet in spite of that, there are certain questions that it's just very difficult to know. It's your license is typically very specific. You may have a license to sell framed photos, but not unframed photos. That would be like the most simple way to say it.
Right.
So our products that we've built for a specific purpose to sell at retail or to end users, can we put that in a movie? We don't know.
Here's the thing. We live in our world where we're a target. I would say most of the companies out there, the smaller companies, go rogue. They just do what they want. They want a photo for their website. They don't look for licensing. They just grab one off the internet and put it up there. Well, we can't do that.
Right.
So we have to have all the licensing because sure enough, we'll be there's a good story with Mario Lemieux I might get into one time. But anyway.
That's a good one.
But anyway, so, and Mario's a friend of mine, so, but there are still issues that you have to deal with. So when you do make a mistake in our world, we pay dearly for it. So we try not to. The movie companies, of course, are much bigger and are bigger targets. So they have to be that much more careful. So when they ask for the Gretzky jerseys and the things for the background, I got a call back saying, we can't use them. We're not comfortable using them. Do you have anything else? And I said, no. I said, short of some of my hockey equipment here, nothing. And they said, well, what do you mean your hockey equipment? Does it have NHL marks? And I said, well, no, this is just a blank jersey with my name on the back of it. And there's no logos in that. It was my house league jersey. They said, can you frame it up? I said, yeah. And they said, well, let's use that.
Oh, wow.
So somewhere, I don't think I've ever seen the movie, but somewhere in some movie, you're going to see a thing with the name Frameworth on the back of the jersey. If you do, let me know which movie it is because
I was going to say, if you're out there listening and and this, one of the strangest things about starting a podcast is you can actually do this. I've done this before on my video game podcast where there was something that I, for my entire life, had wondered about. And I just threw the question out casually. I was starting to think I was misremembering it. And sure enough, the next week, someone responded to me and said, hey, that thing you're thinking, this is it. And they sent me a clip of it, and it was just baffling. So maybe there's someone out there, and if you are,
that sees my name on the back of a jersey. And here's the thing. If you do, I'll let my friends know because they're sure that if they see my name on the back of a jersey in a movie set, it's a comedy for sure. Like, they know how I play hockey, and so those days are gone.
Speaking your life story as told in hockey would be like the first half of the movie Goon minus the fighting.
I'm the goon that didn't fight.
Did you how much did you charge them in royalties to use your name?
Nothing.
Oh wow.
They paid for the framing. That was about it. And I gave them a good price. But so, the memorabilia business started back with the music and then we got into the sports. But then an interesting thing happened. And another side of the story, there's so many stories that we got involved with Rush to do their memorabilia, and that's a whole other thing. following up with the Tragically Hip more recently.
Yep.
But one thing that happened, and you keep an open mind, I'm in the framing business and the memorabilia side, but I'm watching this documentary on HBO called Who the Bleep is Arthur Fogel.
Right.
Okay. It was really interesting, and it was about, I don't know who Arthur Fogel is, but
Hence the title.
right. And
You didn't know who the bleep he was.
it turns out that much of Live Nation that exists now largely out of LA, and one of the biggest, if not the biggest, concert production companies in
the world.
in the world, as well as other things, and have some of the biggest stars. And I'm watching fascinated as people like Lady Gaga and Bono and all these big stars would talk about this Arthur Fogel guy as if he were the rock star.
Right.
Lady Gaga presented her first concert that he was at, that she wanted to pitch him on being part of his Live Nation deal. And it was a fascinating, if you ever get a chance, it's a great documentary. I don't know if it's still showing. I'm sure it is somewhere. But as I'm watching this, I see this guy appear who ran all of the U2 concerts worldwide.
Right.
He was hired by them as an accountant and then got along with Bono. And so he went on the road with U2 for every of the big major tours, the 25 tractor trailer loads, big sets, all that stuff. And he was kind of heading the whole thing up, from setting up the stage to hiring people to putting the right colored jelly beans in their dressing room. Whatever it was, he did. Right?
I mean, that's worth just touching on for a second there. If you've ever seen a band like U2 play a live concert, everything that exists in the arena that you've seen, and we're talking like, Scotiabank or something like that, it's filled with TV screens, stage, all that. That doesn't exist in every city they go. They have to move that from location to location, and it literally is like 17 plus tractor trailers full of material.
It's an amazing thing to watch them set up one of those productions, and this documentary shows quite how it's done and how Arthur Fogel revolutionized the concert world. But that's a whole other story. One of the guys, the guy that ran the U2 tour,
this is the guy who started as the accountant.
Craig, Craig Campbell. I said, I know that guy. And I said,
Craig Campbell?
Craig
Evans.
Craig Evans.
Yeah.
Sorry. Craig Campbell's with the Hockey Hall of Fame. Craig Evans. So Craig's a buddy of mine from high school and played at golf at our golf course at Bayview. And so I said, I wonder if I should be pitching U2 on doing memorabilia for them.
So you got that idea from watching the movie?
Watching the movie. I said, geez, if I got that insight. So I emailed him and asked him if he remembered me. And he said, of course I do. He said, you still playing golf? And his mother lived on the golf course. I said, I'd like to pitch you on something. Do you ever get back to Toronto? And he says, matter of fact, I'm coming at Christmas, see my mom. So I said, why don't I pick you up at the airport? He came in on a Saturday. I said, okay, I'll come see you on Saturday. I'll take you to my office and I'll pitch you. So he came to my office and I told him about doing, framed memorabilia for the band. And, there's nothing out there. So that's legal.
Right.
So why doesn't the band license me to do it, or we'll figure out a way and then we'll, make them some royalties. And he loved the idea, but on the way out, as he said, Brian, I'm not sure this is big enough for them. I said, if they're talking in the millions of dollars, you're talking in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. He says, if that was the case, they've got so many things that they have to deal with.
For sure.
I'm not sure that will be good. I love the concept. Maybe one day. And as he's walking out the door,
you get down on your knees and you just start begging.
No, but I just said, okay, you know what, Craig? I said, is there anything else you're doing that might be of interest that I can help you with? And he says, well, for those tours, we do VIP gifting.
Right.
I said, well, what's that involve? He said, well, it's basically a way to sell tickets at a escalated price, because we sell out every concert. So how do we make more money? Well, we put some of the best seats in the house together with dinner at, say, the Platinum Lounge at the Air Canada Centre. We might put 200 seats available, and we give them a little tour backstage, and we give them a nice little gift.
Sure.
And I said, oh, really? He says, how many gifts? He said, well, for a world tour, it's probably 30,000 gifts.
Nothing to sniff at, yeah.
what's your budget? So he gave me the amount,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, what if we can do something for that will sell on eBay a week later if the person puts it on eBay for $500?
That was your elevator pitch, essentially, was pay
Right.
X amount, and then the next day you see that on eBay for something that is 20 times the value or whatever the value
minimal
is.
amount,
Yeah.
but high perceived value.
Which isn't that very similar to the concept of the season ticket gifting that we talked about earlier? Yeah.
That's my kind of genre there. So he says, what do you got? I said, I don't know, but give me a week and I'll figure it out. That was my exact line. I don't know, but give me a week and I'll figure it out.
Sure.
So I can't get this out of my head. I'm doing the math. We're talking potential millions of dollars worth of business overall. I said, I'm laying in bed and I'm thinking, well, I saw this thing. I work with Canada Post, and they put out a beautiful memorabilia book. It had coins in it.
Yeah.
It had pictures. It had little pieces of stuff that we work with them to try and produce. My good friend Richard McCorkle there. So
Isn't it interesting, before we get into the specifics of that, how often it is that one contact or project blends into another industry so perfectly? We had been working with Canada Post, like you said, for a few years prior to this coming up, and it was just having an idea based on something that we had done with and for them, and now bringing it into the music industry. And it's like, if we hadn't had that initial contact, what idea would we have had? Would we have had the same idea?
No, you have to see it, and you got to keep an open mind. And you've seen my office, and it tends to get junked up pretty good. I collect all sorts of little things, like knickknacks, things.
Yeah, patty wax as
things
well.
I see out there. We talked about the kite that we did the other day. I
Right.
saw a kite, and we turned it into a Leaf jersey, and we had it sold that as a kite. So I looked around the office, and I saw this memorabilia book for Canada Post, an NHL book. They did a 5-year series on it, and I said, that's a great idea.
Right.
So I pitched Craig on it, and I said, I got this idea where we put, a ticket. They don't make tickets for the concert, so we would make the official ticket and embed it in there, and it's only available in the book.
Wait, sorry, they don't make...
Well, they don't recently they don't offer you a ticket. It's all online stuff, right?
Right. Okay.
So we
like
designed
digital
a
ticket,
really
essentially,
cool
yeah.
ticket with holograms and all that, but this was the official ticket, but it wasn't really for sale unless you bought the book.
Right.
It was embedded in the book. And then we tried to figure out all these other things that we could put in the book that would be inexpensive but have a high perceived value.
Right.
So we went back and we did past concert tickets from when they first started, when the band first started, $5 tickets, and wherever we could find them to reproduce them. We designed 3 guitar picks and a drum skin to represent each of the guys in the band.
Right.
And each one was unique to that guy. And we had them in little pockets where you could take them out and actually feel them and touch them and put them back
Like
in.
we had a piece of the drumstick.
Right.
We had the 3 guitar picks that were commemorative U2 guitar picks from that tour. We had, like you said, the drum skin, which was an actual part of the same type of drum kit
Right.
that's used in the band.
Right.
It was all very. And then Bono, we had a pair of sunglasses. Not actually, but that would have been really cool.
So we actually thought of that. But then there was all sorts of neat things in that book.
Right.
Collectibles that didn't cost a lot, but they were only available in the book.
Yeah.
He loved the idea. My good friend Richard helped me put this book together. He did a lot of the design work and helped me with that. And we ended up selling 52,000 books to them. And it was all a pre-order. So we didn't have to worry about going to a bookstore and hoping that they sell through and all that stuff. They loved it so much that U2 did one for the next 2 tours.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to think of new ideas. One time we designed a harmonica that went in
Yes.
there, right? Another time we looked at the sunglasses, but it just wasn't feasible.
It was a harmonica with because that was the Joshua Tree tour, and we actually had an engraved logo from Joshua Tree on the harmonica.
Right.
It was like little ideas like that. I mean, when we talk about books, it's not what you think a book might be. Even if you say a coffee table book, it's not quite that either. It almost is a self-contained commemoration of the concert or that tour, and it just so happens to be within 2 flaps. But that's the only thing that defines it as a book, apart from the pages inside, which all written, information about the band, information about the designs. Essentially, those books were almost like mini who the bleep is Arthur Fogel documentaries contained within a book, because it was talking about the setup process. One of the U2 ones, remember, we had a piece of the stage, the same material the stage was made out of. Yeah.
So to keep the book open at the right thing, we took a piece. It was one of the features of the first tour that they did this book, the first book for, was the stage. It was a very unique stage.
I think it was Innocence and Experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. They were going to do the Innocence and then the Experience tour, and then they did one in between, Joshua Tree.
Right.
So they took a piece. They gave us a huge slab of the stage, and we cut it up into 1 inch by 3 inch pieces, and use that in the book as well. And then set lists, copies of the exact set list and pocket pages. There was a ton of neat stuff in there. Craig loved the idea. We did the book, and I can tell you right now, if you go on eBay, you will find that book at varying prices, but we did find a number of them at $500.
Yeah.
So I was to the penny. He was just amazed. How did you figure that? I just pulled a number out of my head, but I was dead on. So the good news was that Live Nation loved the process so much, Madonna saw the book.
Right.
And she said, well, can we have one made for our concert?
Yes.
So because all they were doing for the gifting was a T-shirt and a hat and a bag.
Yep.
Which is a nice gift. You wear it around, but it gets worn out. So that's a nice commemorative thing. But this one you couldn't. I mean, it's still going to be worth what it's worth in the concession stand.
I remember we went to the U2 concert the first time around because we were involved with production.
Yeah.
So we went, and we were in the area, like the room where people were getting these gifts, and it was like watching kids open up gifts on Christmas morning, where like they were taking it out and comparing it and this, and like before the concert even started. It was really, really cool.
And it was a limited edition book too.
Yes.
Albeit 35, 40,000, whatever it was.
Now it's funny because you mention, Craig did in the conversation that you had that they were looking for gifting for a tour, which was already planned, and they're usually used to something like a T-shirt or whatever it is that they're giving away. When they said yes to do this project, the time crunch was absurd. Now, not to get too inside baseball with this, but I think it's worth bringing up the fact that once we got the order, the tour was getting ready to go, which means they wanted to have, ideally, all the books sent to all the different locations prior to U2 getting there so that there weren't any issues with logistics. They were going to do that by sending it to one central location who works with Live Nation on their freight coordination, and then to disperse that to each of the different locations. Like, this is a worldwide tour we're talking about. This is U2. They play everywhere. Because of the timelines, we could only produce, say, 500 books a day, 1,000 books a day.
These are all hand put together. These weren't published and bound in a bindery.
Right.
These were all the pages had to be inserted with Chicago screws, which is and screwed down so that they all fit properly.
And because of that process, it was a very slow turnaround because it was meticulous. We didn't want this to have the appearance of something that you just find in a Shoppers Drug Mart and Danielle Steele novel or something like that. So we wanted to make sure that it was built with that love, and we did that. However, it was so difficult to keep up with U2. I remember sitting there and watching their tour dates and being like, okay, by the time they play in Tokyo, we need to have 3,000 ahead, and I'm calculating how many books we're able to make each day, and I'm like, we're going to be 100 short. Like, how do we run an extra shift to get another thing out there? And so literally, as U2 was touring around from city to city, we were shipping boxes of books out a day in advance of them getting to the arena.
We learned on the second book to be able to ship big shipments to Europe, big shipments to Asia.
Right. But, similar, you're having this conversation with Craig and you're making it up as you go. You're like, I know that we can do something like this, but we don't know the ins and outs of it yet.
He didn't really know that I didn't have a clue. And again, my motto is, if you want the thing bad enough, you'll find a way. And we did. Yeah.
And we did. And then, like you said, we did, there was a commemorative book we did for a tennis tournament. We did one for Madonna. We did,
Black
Sabbath, U2. But that was this whole new element of sports memorabilia and sports marketing, or just marketing and memorabilia in general, that we hadn't done before. And we didn't have really a corporation set up to do this problem. So we actually made a new company that would be able to get an ISBN number and publish books, because that's what we did with these. Yeah. And that took the form of Frameworth Publishing.
When you think of that, multi-million dollars worth of business being done out of one little meeting and a last minute comment to say, what else do you do?
Yeah.
Like he was walking out the door.
Yeah.
And I just said, well, you got to wait for me because I'm driving you home.
Yeah.
But what else do you do? And that's when he says, well, I don't know. Can you come up with something for the gifting?
I mean, so this is one thing that I do want to stress, because I know that we have a lot of listeners out there who are interested in breaking into the marketing or memorabilia world in some form. And I always talk to people. I've done a couple lectures at some colleges in the area that have sports management programs. And I always like to talk to the students and get their sense of what they think sports marketing is, or marketing in general. And everyone has this idea that every office you're going to walk into, like sports marketing is this flashy, prestigious, sleek thing. Every office you walk into is going to be like glass ceilings everywhere. Like think about CAA or like the Entourage offices in the agencies or something. So much of the way that this industry runs, and it turns out this is just the way most industries across the world run, are kind of seat of their pants. When you get a commemorative book at a U2 concert and the concert is put on immaculately and everything runs smoothly, there is not a single day of that concert where people are not scrambling behind the scenes as though they're pulling an all-nighter to finish an essay to get it done. That's the way our world runs.
You're talking about true marketing. When you talk about the CAA Entourage and Tom Cruise movie type thing,
sure,
you're talking about player agents.
Right.
That's a little bit different story.
I'm just talking about the aesthetic. The aesthetic of like, you think that where you're going to go is like this well-kempt, everyone's in a suit and they sit down and it's like, what are we going to do about the U2 book? And then it's like, let's do this. Okay, how long do we have? 3 years to prepare. We're all going to be ready for it. That is not how these things go.
And I'll tell you something. And I guess I can tell this story, but with the Madonna book.
Yeah. Oh, I think I know where you're going. I love
with
this.
the Madonna book, you are dealing with artists. And artists work at their own pace and their own time, and they're not concerned about deadlines or anything else other than getting themselves on stage and presenting their act the right way.
Mm-hmm. With their vision, yeah.
So now we're on the Madonna book, and part of it we thought was really cool to have, because it was kind of a sexy book. It was, it's all about fashion design and all that. We even had a piece of one of her outfits. It was really cool, embedded in the book. Yeah. Like the same material. So it was like a touch and feel type thing. So anyway, we're waiting for her. We thought it was a great idea, and so did she, to put her lip prints on the inside cover.
Right.
Okay. So we had like bright red lipstick. The cover was bright red. So Madonna said she loved that idea. So we said, well, we got to get this thing within the next couple of weeks. So we sent out a piece of paper just for her to put lipstick on and kiss.
Yeah.
2 weeks go by, nothing.
Yeah.
3 weeks go by, nothing. Now we're a week behind schedule for the world tour.
Because we can't go to print until we have it.
And I think she started in Europe.
Yeah.
So now we're waiting. Now we're 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and she won't let anybody else kiss the paper. We just needed lip prints, right? But it's got to be hers.
Sure.
So we finally get this piece of lip print back, and we embed it. Well, now we're 3.5 weeks behind schedule, which means that in order to get them to the concerts in Europe, they couldn't ship them by boat.
Yeah.
They had to ship them by air. That was a $25,000 delay.
Yeah.
That they had to pick up because it wasn't our fault. And she didn't care. Just fine. Okay, add it to the bill and whatever it was.
I remember waiting there again, I stress that feeling of every industry you think runs immaculately doesn't behind the scenes. No. It's just common. And we're sitting there like, well, why can't we go to print? Well, we're waiting for someone to kiss a piece of paper, and it's like all the power to her. Madonna isn't Madonna without her strict attention to detail, but that's the result of it sometimes.
I mean, in fairness, and this happened with all the artists, the book is not anywhere near the most important part.
Right.
Except that they don't want anything substandard out there. So although they don't have time, they're focusing on their act and their music and all that stuff. They also don't want anything substandard, so they are not going to do anything or let anything be done without their final approval.
Right.
And that was the case with all the bands.
Yeah, always. And it always is. And that's kind of the way you want it. You want those artists that just have so much attention to detail because they're so obsessed with their brand and who they are. You know, not in a conceited way, but like an artist like that knows what they want to put out there. So we do a lot with Live Nation. We did at that time, and we're thinking, well, if it works for them, it's got to work somewhere else. And that brought us into, I believe, the next project, which was the season ticket gifting for the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Toronto Raptors, which we talked about in an earlier episode.
Right.
How did that meeting come about?
Well, now that we knew how to do the books and what our budgets could be and how to make them properly and eliminate all the hassles, we thought, well, okay, we have a lot of hockey teams that give out gifting for those that have seasons tickets. We said, okay, let's see what we can do for that. Instead of giving, again, a hat or a baseball or whatever it's going to be, this hit a pretty good budget point, and we thought, okay, let's see if they're interested. And they did. They had an interest in giving those out as gifts for seasons ticket holders or suite holders. And sometimes there's an added level. For instance, the regular season ticket holder might get the regular book, but the suite holders who spend a lot more money there might get the same book, but a couple extra pages added with their corporate logo in there because we hand make the books. And then there might be a couple of autographed photos from Mitch Marner or Kyle Lowry or somebody like that.
Yeah, those were great, and it did give us that opportunity. Like when we talk about what we had done with the Live Nation books, and you factor in all of those additional kind of elements to it, which would have been the drum kit and the picks and stuff like that. You really just take the same perspective on what sorts of things in the world of sports can we apply to this as well.
We gathered up a lot of game used sticks and cut them up, broken sticks, and we put a piece of the stick in a lot of those things.
Rather than a piece of the floor, for example, for you two. Now, that, though, wasn't enough to scratch the itch for you. You had this shiny new corporation, Frameworth Publishing, and you thought, we've done some tours, we've done some season ticket gifts, but I, Brian Aaronworth, have not published a book with the number of words that are required to be kind of like a New York Times bestseller.
No, you know what? That really isn't the case. That's not how it evolved. As you know, Eddie Shack was a very good friend of my father's and became a very good friend of mine. And Eddie loved to come in here on almost a daily basis and shoot the shit and cause havoc. And we called him Mr. HR Violation because every time he passed somebody's desk, he'd make a comment that would probably cause us some grief. And I literally, and you being head of HR and everything else here, would have to go around and say, are you uncomfortable with what he does? And everybody loved him so much.
There were some accommodations that we were all okay making, and,
and we had to make sure that they were fine.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't want anybody taking offense, and everybody kind of to a person said, no, we love Eddie. Yeah. He's a character. He's an old school guy, and there's no excuse for a lot of the things that he got away with, but he did. And so he'd come into my office, and every day he'd sit there for 15 minutes and tell me a story. Mm-hmm. And he'd tell me a dirty joke, or he'd tell me a joke, or...
Why don't you share one of those right now? No, please don't. Actually, let's do a couple one-liners. Here's a little peek into the Eddie Shack curtain, if you will. He loved to tell jokes. He didn't care how many times he had told you that joke.
No, so they're embedded in your memory, and they're all in the book.
They're all in the book, and they're all
so
in
I'll
my
start.
Head. Okay, you go for it.
Eddie was from Sudbury.
Uh-huh.
Eddie used to say, I'm from Sudbury. He said, only hookers and hockey players come from Sudbury. Which team did your mother play for?
The one he'd always say to me, because I'm a lonely individual, he would always say, jerking off is like three-putting, you're going to do it. That's one that I remember quite a bit. And hey, feel free to use any of these if you want. And maybe you wonder why for a limited time, Eddie Shack was banned from the alumni box for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Because it didn't matter who was in there.
Didn't matter.
Kids, anything. He had a great story about Bobby Hull going into an old folks home, and Bobby Hall went up to some woman in a wheelchair, an older woman, and she looked at him. She said, you look familiar. He said, well, do you know who I am? And she said, no, but if you go to the front desk, they'll tell you.
Oh, my God.
It was like, and Eddie used to collect all these jokes and say them over and over again. So they're firmly embedded, just like Brad Jansen's jokes.
Yeah, very similar. It feels like that hockey/golf culture of telling the same stories.
So Eddie used to come into my office and he'd tell all these stories. And this was a couple years back. And I said, this is about November of the year. No, sorry, it was about April. And I said, Eddie, and he was getting up in age, and I said, you got to get all these down in some story, a book. And he said, well, I already had a book written about me, but he said, I said, well, I know that was kind of more of a mainstream book. I said, we got to do something kind of like what we've done with you two and that, but maybe a little bit more book.
Yeah, not as memorabilia focused. Yeah,
just a lot of neat things in it, but tell the stories like you tell them from a hockey player's, as if you're sitting around the dressing room talking to fellow players.
Right.
That's what the fan base wants to hear. Behind the scenes story. What happened when you were in a bar in Chicago and that type of stuff.
Kind of what we try to imbue on this podcast as well. It's more of that intimate kind of just shooting the shit stories that not everyone is around to hear.
So I had no idea what I was doing with a mainstream book. Live Nation took these books and they bought them all outright at the beginning, so I knew I had a sale. I didn't know how to get into Indigo and all the bookstores and Amazon. But he says, well, why don't we do a book? He said, you've done some books. I said, well, it's not the same kind of book. But he said, yeah, that would be kind of cool. So I said, you want to do a book? He said, yeah, I do. So, Eddie had been out of the limelight, not out of the limelight, but he was, he was a big entertainer giant throughout the years when he was a Leaf in the 60s and 70s and kept going, pop shop days. So I immediately got on the phone while he was sitting there to a good friend of mine, Ken Reed.
Who was on the podcast
Who was on the podcast.
Broadcaster
and
Sportsnet,
he has written a number of books about hockey cards and this and that. And I said, look, I'm sitting with Eddie, and he wants to do a book. Would you be interested in writing it? Because I know nothing about writing. And he said, I would be honored to
That's
do the
amazing.
book. Honored to do the book.
We should say as well that, yes, he has written a lot of books about hockey cards and things, but he also did a similar project to what we were looking to do with Dennis Marouk.
Right.
Where he would kind of hear the stories from the athlete and pen it in their own words.
There's another name we got to get on the podcast, Dennis. But
yeah.
So he said yes. So I met with them about a week later, all three, and Ken said to me, he says, okay, when do you want to produce this? And I said, well, it'd probably be good to launch just before Christmas.
Right.
And he said, so this was 2019. He said, so 2021, right? And I went, no, this year. And this was May. I said, I want to launch it in November. He says, that's impossible. You can't do that. I said, no, it's possible. We'll figure it out. I said, you got some time to do. He said, well, I'm in the middle of some other projects. I said, you want to do the book or not? And he said, Brian, I wouldn't pass this up. He says, I need to sit with Eddie and talk to him. And then I got my friend Richard to put together the concept and the idea.
Same Richard that helped us out with the Live
great
Nation
guy.
deal. Yep.
Another guy we should get on the show. So Richard is a creative genius, and he put together the concept, which was Eddie just telling stories, lots of photographs, stuff that you hadn't seen before.
Right.
And then he came up with the concept of having Eddie tell the story. But if you know Eddie's wife, Norma, and she'll come on at some point and talk about it, but
she's done so much for hockey, especially in terms of like player union deals, things like that. She's spearheaded quite a bit there. Yeah.
So he came up with the concept, say, well, sometimes Eddie's stories, he misremembers them a little bit.
Maybe on purpose, maybe
well,
not.
Yeah, and he makes them his own and all that. So Eddie would tell the story, and then every couple of pages, there'd be a yellow, look like embedded in the thing, sticky
like
note.
A Post-it
that
note,
says, Norma says.
Yes.
And then she would give her version of the story, and sometimes completely opposite.
It was
like Eddie doesn't remember that right.
It was like, think about when you're watching The Office or Modern Family, and Michael Scott says something, and then it immediately cuts to Jim being like, "That's not really what." You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like it's that exposition that you would never really get in a book. But I found that the way that it was done with the Post-it notes and the Norma says and just fact checking right off the bat made it such an interactive way to read a book. If you're curious at all in Eddie Shack's life, or you just like good behind the scenes hockey stories, you should absolutely check that
Check
book
it out. They're still available at Amazon and Indigo, and then we have some here. Of course, you can buy them online. What was really amazing was the photos that Eddie supplied.
Yeah,
he had back in his day, he had the #1 hit on the Chum charts, which was the Chum radio station had the Chum chart out every week, and he had the #1 hit, and Eddie used to brag about that, and he said, you know who took me off that list? He says, bumped me from #1 spot was Nancy Sinatra. Nancy Sinatra, these boots are made for walking. She said, that's pretty good, eh? And he talked about his days at the pop shop. But Eddie...
That song, though, that he had was Clear the Track, Here Comes Shaq.
Right.
Yeah, which is fame. Everyone who knows Eddie Shack knows that song.
And he sings it all the time, or he did.
Yeah.
So there were so many interesting things. This guy was the first guy that I know of to really market himself, to get outside of the world of hockey. He had hockey. He had Christmas tree business. He bought a golf course. He almost prided himself on the fact that he was illiterate.
Yeah, couldn't read.
And yet he made millions of dollars in investments. He was such a smart man.
He couldn't read, but he knew how to get someone to write a check for him.
Right.
That's when you can do that. Who needs to read? Yeah. Well, it was to the point even where if he were at a signing and someone asked him to say, "Hey, to Mikey, all the best," someone would have to write that down for him, and he would essentially
he knew how to write, but he didn't know how to spell.
Right. So he would mimic essentially what was written down there, but he wouldn't have been able to write, to sound it out phonetically.
Yeah. Eventually he got. I drove around with him. And so it occurred to me as I'm driving up north to go fishing with him, and he's driving, and I'm going, how does he know what sign to cut off on the highway? He just knew by instinct. But he used to drive his car up to Highway 7 or somewhere near Barrie to get his car filled up, because he knew the girl in the station would come out and fill his car up to where he wanted it filled up, because he couldn't read he didn't know how much he was paying for it.
Oh, that's amazing.
There are so many great stories in that book, and so many that we couldn't even put in there because it would be massive, but the book was great. We ended up getting it ready for November.
Yes.
And I didn't know that book business. So I started phoning around September and saying, we're bringing out a book of Eddie Shack. Do you want it? And Barnes & Noble said, are you kidding me? You got to phone us a year and a half in advance of a book coming out. And what publishing company are you anyways? Penguin? I go, it's a Frameworth Publishing. And they go, who is that? But I did run into a really nice guy at Indigo who was a hockey fan. He says, we want that book.
Nice.
And I said, if you do the book, Eddie will come. And Eddie was happy to do autograph signings. He did them everywhere. I had him on tour for a month, which was such a memorable time. Some good, mostly good times, some miserable times for me.
Like across Canada, essentially.
I did the East Coast. We did a tour in Halifax, and he did CBC radio. We were up at 6 a.m. doing breakfast television, and then CBC, and then book signings. Even in Halifax, we went to a Rogers store that had booked him in for 2 hours from 5 to 7 at night.
Right.
And we go in there, and there's nobody in there.
Uh-oh.
Right? There's one guy waiting for an autograph, which was not the case pretty much anywhere else we went. But they didn't promote it that well, and whatever it was. But he was obligated to go. And my wife was, I missed my wife's retirement party. She's a flight attendant. So she's in San Francisco with her friends, and I'm trying to order a bottle of champagne through the hotel. And I'm on the phone, and Eddie's sitting there at the table. And about 10 minutes into it, I look around, and he's not there. And I go, where the hell is Eddie? And the guy in the store says, he just left, and you see that bar across the street? And I see him in the window, and he's drinking red wine. And I went, you can't do that. We're supposed to be here for 2 hours. They're paying for a signing, right?
Yeah.
And they bought so many books I run across there, and then he says, bullshit. He says, they can't promote me well enough. He says, it's embarrassing. I'm not going there, so I'm going to sit here, and I will buy anybody that wants an autograph a drink. They can come in here, have a glass of red wine with me, but I'm not going back and sitting in an empty store. So I went, okay. And by that time, I can't say anything to Eddie because, he's 79 years old, and he's this
is the tail end of the tour. He's been up at 6 a.m.
tired.
every day.
I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what he's been going through. I mean, it was an incredible experience. Then we went to a good friend of mine, Brad Hartland, had about 3 bars out there, and we did tours of his restaurants and book signings there. And Eddie was happy because they served beer there and red wine. And he could drink, and he was flirting with all the waitresses, which was Eddie's style. And so that book tour, and then I flew him to Philadelphia to do Spit and Chicklets.
Right. He was on Spit and Chicklets.
Well, that was a great show. And of course, I heard every story over and over again
Sure.
because it was a routine in breakfast television. And he got on set, and then he interrupted him. After his segment on breakfast television, he went on the next set
Yes.
where they were talking about the zoo or something. And they just, and he says, oh, and I wanted to give you one of the books. And they stopped everything and they started talking to him again. Eddie could get away with anything.
He's just a person of a bygone era. Take that to mean what you will. He got away with saying a lot of things that you can't say now. But when you had him in that sort of context, you really started to realize why his nickname was Eddie the Entertainer. Yeah. Why he really came into his own. It's so good to know. Anyone who knows Eddie or had heard of Eddie, he's so outgoing, and the fact that he passed during COVID, and
well, that's the other side, which was very interesting because Eddie was the book did become a bestseller.
Yeah.
I said I can sell 5,000 books, which is a Canadian bestseller for a sports book. I said I can do that out of the trunk of my car with Eddie Shack.
Right.
If he's willing to spend the time, I can do it. Indigo was a big part of that. They did very well with it. And we sold over 6,000 books.
Nice. And
we still have a few, but that being. But the interesting thing was, I was told that Eddie could not, I was insistent. We're going to bring this out for Christmas.
Right.
Okay. And everybody said couldn't be done. Even Ken Reed's publisher said, Brian, it's way too short a time frame. You should wait a year.
Right.
And I said, no, we're going to do this. And he said, well, good luck to you. And then I remember doing an interview at Sportsnet where his publisher came by, and he said, it's incredible you got that done. He says, I didn't know that was even feasible. Well, the good news is Eddie got sick shortly after that, and he passed away.
Yeah.
So,
but that was, I feel like it was, Eddie has given us so much, so much.
Yeah.
And I don't mean, in terms of like money or transactions or signatures. And so he gave us so much because when I'm at work, all I want to do is work. I don't want people coming into my office and talking to me. I'm very particular about that. The one exception that I would always make was when Eddie came by. He always had a story, and there was something about him, even though it was a story that I had heard countless times.
Oh, yeah. And he pat your dog Stella?
He refused to call my dog Frankie. He would call it Stella, and he would come, and you'd hear him from down the hall.
Wapachowski, was that the girl that he was
based off of his first girlfriend. Yeah.
Stella Wapachowski.
Yeah.
In Sudbury.
Oh man, just what a human being. Glad that we got to be part, you more so than myself, in bringing this book out, having him relive his legacy for one more kind of.
Well, that was the biggest part. Eddie hit the limelight big time.
Yeah.
During that time period, radio interviews, television interviews, book tours. He was back in the limelight, which is where he always liked to be.
Yep.
He was bigger than life, and then he got sick and he passed away, and he had that last big hurrah, and I'm so proud to be part of that.
Couldn't have asked for a better way for someone like him, to not only relive his own stories, but then to share them with everyone else. It was fantastic.
And like everything else, that's my version. But then there's going to be Norma's version,
yeah.
and we got to get Ken Reed back to do that version as well. Because he was a big part of it, and even Richard McCorkle. Maybe we get a round table here where we have all of them on. That would be
love
great.
that.
Can we afford enough mics?
Well, we're gonna have to increase the budget to this podcast. That's all I know.
And maybe some air conditioning.
Maybe some air conditioning here. Hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can probably literally see us sweating as we do this right now. But look, I think that's a great way to end it off because it kind of brought us full circle. We started off with just an idea out of nowhere with no substantial way of bringing it to life, and that with the job with Live Nation allowed us to incorporate a new company, which allowed us to put the idea into our head and then to relive that final moment of Eddie Shack's time in the spotlight was anything we could have ever asked for. So thank you for sharing that with us. Would love as well, if you have any questions about Eddie or maybe a story about a time that you saw him, he's going to be a person who gets brought up on this podcast quite a bit. So if you're out there and you have some questions or you want to share a story, signoffpod@frameworth.com. You can also find us on Twitter. All that will be read as the end credits roll. But until that happens,
you know what I was thinking? One last thing.
Yeah.
I have a few autographed books laying around.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
we should. I think we'll put our minds together after this podcast is over, and we'll figure out a way to maybe give out a few of those.
That sounds
they're
great.
pretty rare. He every time he came in, he signed a few books for me. I put a few away. So maybe we get we have a little contest.
I
or
would
a
love
little
to
thing.
do a giveaway. So pay attention to our social media handles. Wait for them as the end credits roll in this, and you'll hear how to get in contact with us there. We'll also be sending some stuff if you're not already a Frameworth insider. That's a great way to stay in touch with all the news and goings on at Frameworth. So once again, thank you for sharing all those stories and taking us on that journey. Brian Aaronworth, president of Frameworth Sports Marketing. I am Mikey Aaronworth, not the president of Frameworth Sports Marketing, but the co-host of the Sign Off podcast. And this is us signing off. Nice. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we made it to the end of yet another episode. Thanks again so much for joining us. You can find videos of all of our episodes on YouTube by searching the Sign Off Podcast. You can also follow us on Twitter at Frameworth Sport or Instagram at Frameworth Sports. And hey, if you're not sick of me yet, you can find me on Twitter over at Retrograde Mikey, or you can always find me embarrassing myself over on Instagram at Aaronworth. The Sign Off is a proud product of Fadoo Productions and Sad Styles Productions. Executive producers, Mikey Aaronworth and Andrew Bascom. Until next week, this is Mikey Aaronworth, signing off.
Furnished by Sad Styles Productions.
Get into it.